Now, what I'd like to talk about next is the other scale. You know, when you talk about blues, there's basically two scales that people use all the time. The blues scale, and then the other one is the major pentatonic. A major pentatonic, as the name implies, is kind of like a major scale, but you leave out the notes that sound real sweet, like the major seventh. And what you're left with is this. I'll play it down in the open position for you, and then I'll show you the typical shape, of course, that everybody uses. That's the sound of the major pentatonic. Now here's a pattern that almost everybody uses. Start with the 12th position and play the blues scale. Right? Now take that shape, move your hand down 3 frets to 9th position, play exactly the same scale. Now the only thing is, instead of landing on this note, which was the root, you're going to land on this note. This is the root now. Right? So. Other than that, you can almost play the same exact licks, right? So, right? So the same phrases I would have played up here, I can move down 3 frets, and I can play them down here, right? Now, what advantage do you get from using that other scale? What's a different color? The blues scale sounds kind of nasty. It's got the minor third, the minor seventh, the flat 5, kind of dissonant tones. The major pentatonic scale sounds a lot sweeter. And as I'll show you in a minute, there are a couple of famous blues players. Each one kind of works out of a different scale, and their styles are different for that reason. So what I'll do in just a second here is roll tape, and we're going to play the same rhythm track, and I'm going to play over that rhythm track using the major pentatonic scale on the 1 chord, and then when the chord progression goes to the 4 chord, I'll use the minor pentatonic scale, not changing key, but using the same key. So E major pentatonic on the 1 chord, and then E minor pentatonic on the 4 chord and the 5 chord. And you'll see quite a difference in sound. All right, now I mentioned 2 well-known blues players that use those scales in different ways. 2 guys I'm thinking of are B.B. King and Albert King. Now, they taught me a new position. I, probably like you, felt most comfortable keeping either open, 7th fret, or 12th fret. But when I listened to Albert King carefully, I found the only way I could get that sound was to actually play out of 5th position. That's a really alien position for most guitar players, because you don't see a comfortable spot there to use your index finger. But we're only going to play a couple of notes here. Right now, what I'm going to do is, in order to play the Albert King style, I'm going to put my index finger on E, 2nd string at the 5th fret. Right? Now what he does, he's a big guy, right? And when he wants to play high notes, he doesn't move up the neck, he bends to him. He just wrings that guitar's neck until he gets up there. So, right? So you gotta put some muscle behind those notes, and what I'm doing is bending from the 8th fret on the 2nd string up to the equivalent of the 12th fret. That's 2 whole steps. Right? And then trying to hit every note in between at different times. So, right? Now, you can play out of just those 2 notes, index finger and 3rd finger. Now maybe throw in one other one. With your 2nd finger playing the 3rd string at the 7th fret. And I'll guarantee you can sound like Albert King in about a minute and a half. Now, B.B. King, on the other hand, he's a little bit more uptown, a little bit slicker, more sophisticated kind of sound. He'll sit in that same position, but instead of emphasizing the minor tones, he'll emphasize the major tone. So index finger, third finger off the 7th fret, bend it up a whole step, and you get the major third. And then use your 2nd finger on the 3rd string. And that's all you need, right there. Just that little spot. Now I'm going to play over the tape one more time. And first time I'm going to play in the B.B. King style, and the second time I'll play in the Albert King style. And check out closely how my hand stays in that one position. The fingers never leave the hand. It's very important. All right, so we're going to roll tape here, and we'll see what it sounds like. You know, the way blues players have learned to play from each other down through the years, and it continues, is by imitation. You could write out a whole bunch of licks. There are a lot of books on the market to show you a lot of licks. It's one of the hardest things in the world to read. Trying to read blues is like trying to read Old English or something. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. You don't get the feel of it, the phrasing. So what I would like to do is just play some stuff for you, and we'll learn it right here on the spot. I'm going to play a little phrase, a 4-beat phrase, and you're going to imitate it. You're going to come right back at me. And if you hear something you like and you want to hear it again, roll the tape back. The camera's right up on my hands, and you can see what I'm doing pretty well. So this will show you a lot of stuff about phrasing, the little bite-sized chunks of phrases that you then put together to make longer lines. And pretty much by the time we get through with this little section here, you're going to know as much about how I play as I could tell you in another 6 or 7 reels. Okay, so let's go ahead and do it. Next thing I want to talk to you about is taking what we've already picked up. We've got our two scales. Now, rock players think in scales, but when you talk about blues, you really have to think more about the chord. So let's take our two scales and figure out how they can fit together to create a chord concept. All right, we learned our minor pentatonic or blues scale and major pentatonic. Now, when you ask a blues player, you know, some 60-year-old guy, what do you think about when you play? The last thing they're going to tell you is about chord tones or scale patterns and stuff, because they pick it up over the years and it becomes a natural thing. It's like, you know, what do you think about when you walk? So what I'm going to talk about here is something that you discuss when you're trying to communicate with somebody, but it's something that to make it really work, you have to just live with it for a while and absorb it, and it does take time. All right, the concept is this. Let's say we're playing in the key of A. Now, when I'm playing over an A chord, of course, I know what the scales are. We just talked about them. But how do you know where to land? Well, we talked about this a little earlier. Chord tones. I look at the notes of an A chord, and right, those are the notes of an A dominant seventh chord. So when I play a lick, I look at any one of those notes and I say, those are all strong notes. They're going to sound good. So I can play a lick and end anywhere. There's the root. There's the third. There's the fifth. And then there's the seventh, right? Now, you could almost say that it doesn't matter what you play as long as you end on a strong note. Well, that's not quite true, but that's got a lot to do with it. So knowing where your strong notes are is very important. Now, we've played over an A chord, and we've come up with a lot of strong phrases. What happens when you go to D? Well, what a lot of players will do is shift position. They'll say, well, A is 5th position, D is 10th position, for instance. Well, you sound a lot better if you can figure out how to play in one position and still reflect the sound of the chord. So when I go from A to D, it's kind of like the whole picture changes. Instead of seeing the notes of the A chord as being strong, I see the notes of the D chord. Now I can play the same scale and aim for the notes that belong to that D chord, especially the root. All right? Same thing on the E chord. There's an E dominant 7th chord in 5th position. And there's the root of the E chord, right? Or there's the third of the E chord. In other words, being aware, almost like there's a little ghost shape of that chord there all the time. And when I'm playing, I'm saying, where are the strong notes? What note do I want to land on? I use the blues scale as the foundation, and then I use the chord tones to help me make it sound strong, okay? Now, in addition to that, when you're playing over a dominant chord, like we've been using, talked about 9th chords and 13th chords. Those chords contain notes that are not in the ordinary blues scale, so I can add those notes in too. Right? And instead of thinking of them as major pentatonic scale, I say, well, that's a chord tone. That's the 13th. Right? Or there's the 9th. Right? So I'm thinking about the chord tones and less about the scales, and as I go along, I find that that makes me a stronger player. Now we're going to play over that same rhythm track one more time, and what I'm going to do this time is I'm really going to play off of each chord. So I'll play a couple of them, and I'll point out through the way that I'm playing how I'm getting from chord to chord.